mead, but this time I'm going for a recipe that includes cherries, blackberries, and blueberries, and it's called Viking Blood mead. So the color is going to be really kind of dark red to purplish. Right here I have all of my cherries, my blackberries, and my blueberries that I've frozen, and that's just to pull out some more sugar, make the juices more sugary and sweet. And so first thing what we're going to do is we are going to clamp that down. We're going to blend for about a minute, 2 minutes. Okay, now that that has run for about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes, we basically have like a cherry, blackberry, blueberry smoothie. And this stuff is going to sit in with our mead for about 3 to 4 weeks. The next step is I'm going to close this back up so that this doesn't come into contact with any other kind of bacteria or stuff that we don't want in our brew. And the next thing is I have to separate about 1.5 gallons. Actually, no, probably like half a gallon from this 2.5 gallon jug. And we'll come back as soon as I'm done with that. Okay, so now I've separated half a gallon up into this little jug. It's labeled, so 2 quarts, half gallon. And I turned it into some delicious vitamin C water, which I will drink while I make this mead. Okay, I've been heating up my honey in some hot water so that it should pour a little better. We have 32 ounces of organic, raw, unfiltered honey, which is kind of what I always go for to use. And we're going to add it to our water to make our must. And this is going to take a while, so sit back and enjoy the show. While this is working, the honey is kind of still pouring in there. I'm going to get my yeast starter ready. Usually I would do this a little earlier, but it doesn't really matter right now since everything's going to be done at room temperature. I'm using wine yeast from Cellar Science. This is good for up to 18% alcohol. I'm imagining that this brew is probably going to come out to around 11 to 13% alcohol by volume. That's kind of what I'm shooting for. So for 2 gallons, I'm going to use 2 teaspoons of yeast. Set that aside and use a little bit of my honey water that I made earlier. Pour that in here. Good. And then give this a good shake. Now, as you can see, the honey is just about done filtering through. We have a little bit left over, but I'm not too worried about that since we're going to be pouring our berry mixture in through here as well. Hopefully we don't get a clog. Upon further inspection of the viscosity of this kind of like cherry, blackberry, blueberry smoothie that we have created, I'm almost certain that this should fit through. Might have to pour a little bit of warm water into it just to get it to kind of combine, but it should work. Let's see. Pull the blade out first. And it's time to pour. Don't go everywhere, please. Kind of guide it in a little bit. Alright, stop right there for right now. And we'll just focus on getting all of this stuff in. I love the color already. This is going to be good. Okay, so that should be enough of our berry mixture. We do have a little bit left over, but I think I'm going to save that for myself to drink as a smoothie because I don't want to go too far up to the top. I want there to be a little bit of room so that if there is kind of a foam over with the yeast, which I've never had a foam over with yeast with mead before, but if there is, there's a little bit of room here to make sure that it doesn't overflow. So that's where we are right now. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is mix all of this so that everything incorporates the honey, the water, and the berries to make our must. Right now, it's almost nothing. It's kind of like a separated mixture. It will look like this when everything is done, but I want to check and see how my yeast is doing. And if we listen really closely, we should hear like a little bit of releasing gases. There was no major sound, which means that it's not ready yet, but you do hear the yeast working. It's almost like a little fizzy noise. So we're going to let this sit for just a little bit longer, but we will incorporate this. So we'll cap. And hopefully this doesn't spill over. There we go. Oh, that's so fun. I want to make sure that all the honey on the bottom gets moving and incorporates with the water. So we will shake just a little bit longer. I do have Woo! I don't know if any of you saw that, but the cap shot off. That was crazy. Woo! Let's dip it into the sanitizer for a little bit so that it doesn't cause any bacterial infection, but I think we're good on incorporation. Wonder if there was a little bit of yeast in that unfiltered honey, caused a little bit of a gaseous buildup, and so it knocked off my cap. But that's the fun thing, I think, that about brewing mead, at least, is that it's super simple, but you never know what's going to happen because all honey is different, and all honey has different kinds of, especially unfiltered honey, different kinds of microorganisms that live inside of it, which provide certain enzymes that make each mead just slightly different. Now here's the thing. I could let this mead kind of ferment on its own, because I do think that the unfiltered honey does have some yeast in it, especially from the bees that are going around to all these different kinds of flowers and trees and collecting the pollen. So if it is unfiltered honey and very lightly processed honey, that means that there is some sort of yeast in here. But if I do let it ferment on its own, it's going to take a very long time, and I don't have a year or a year and a half to wait for this mead to be ready. So let's add our wine yeast to the mixture now, and we can continue to incorporate. It does smell really good. Here we go. See if we can get a good shot of this going in there. Very nice, and we will give it a light twist and shake. Just put that right there. Just to incorporate the yeast. Now this is a little cold since our berries were frozen, but that's not going to harm the yeast. It might make it dormant for a little bit, but I am keeping this out in room temperature. So in about 24 hours we should know if our yeast took or not. But you can see why they call it Viking Blood mead. It's not entirely red because we used a little something different than just cherries, but pretty soon the fermentation will take place and all the yeast will drop all of this material down. We'll have some stuff floating up at the top, but when we start to filter out after fermentation's done, we should have a clear product. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do before we let this Viking Blood mead sit for about 3 to 4 weeks is we need to take an original gravity reading so that we can kind of get an idea as to how alcoholic our final brew is going to be. We put this in a carboy initially because I don't have a lid to my fermenting bucket, so I'm going to be using a hose siphon to be putting it inside of my hydrometer. So let's go ahead and do that right now. There we go, balance up. Hydrometer a little farther away. Pop the top. And I'm going to be putting this a little bit below the surface level. In here, and then we get our hydrometer reader, which has a whole bunch of little gradiated markings. We stick that inside. Hopefully we didn't overfill it, and we did not overfill it, which is perfect. At the moment we're looking at 0.030, so 1.030 or 1030, which is actually really low for what we were going for. I was hoping that this would be somewhere around 1060, but maybe the honey hasn't incorporated fully yet, so we will shake this around a little more and we'll take another hydrometer reading in a second. Also, I just realized that this is still kind of cool, so that could be affecting the reading. With everything being cold, it kind of contracts, so maybe I should wait until everything is room temperature to take a hydrometer reading. So we will come back to this when everything is room temp and take another reading. Ended up not having to add anything extra. As you can see here, we have a little bit of all of the fruit is kind of gathered to the top because fermentation has started and it's pushing everything up. It's alive. Look at it. It's amazing. And you got the bubbles going. And this will go for about 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4. We'll see. Okay, so it's been 24 hours since we started the Viking Blood mead, and I took a gravity reading this morning. It was a little bit cold, so it was affecting our original reading. Didn't have to add anything to the mead. Basically, it was at 1050, which should, if I'm doing the math correctly on this, it should give us about 7 to 8% alcohol by volume when it's done. That's fine. I think some of the sugars in the fruits will get fermented as well, so maybe we'll get a little bit extra alcohol content from that. And here is our little fermentation bucket. I've kind of covered it up with a shirt so that it can mitigate some of the sunlight that is coming through the open window there, because this is the kitchen and we can't always be operating in the dark, and I have nowhere else to put it. So I will come back in about 3 to 4 weeks to the end of the month to show you guys kind of the finished fermented product.